What if our understanding of history isn't as black and white as we've been led to believe? What if the Dark Ages, a term often used to describe the Middle Ages in medieval Christian Europe, weren't so dark after all? And what if the Enlightenment, a period often celebrated as the dawn of modern thinking, wasn't as luminous as it's typically portrayed? Let's journey back in time to the so-called Dark Ages, a period spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, often dismissed as a time of intellectual darkness and cultural stagnation. Yet, Anthony Esolen, English literature professor at Providence College, reveals that those who lived in these so-called Dark Ages were responsible for some of the most significant advancements in human history. They established the university system, a foundation for modern education. They pioneered modern science, pushing the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. They revolutionized architecture, creating buildings and structures that continue to inspire awe today. They produced profound works of art and literature, and even introduced musical notation, transforming the way we create and appreciate music. They also laid the groundwork for essential social institutions, including schools, orphanages, and hospitals. Now, let's pivot to the so-called Enlightenment period, a period in the 17th to 19th centuries, often lauded by atheists as the era of rational thought, freedom, and progress, that saved us from the so-called Dark Ages of medieval Christian Europe. Yet if we look closely, we find that the so-called Enlightenment was instead a dark time of turbulence and turmoil. In a 2015 article titled "Solzhenitsyn Mourned Bastille Day, So Should All Christians," John Zmirak reveals that the first modern genocide in the West took place in France, in Vendée, beginning in 1793. It was undertaken by modern progressive apostles of enlightenment and aimed at pious peasants in the Vendée region of France. And also revealed that the mass murders of Christians in Russia during the 20th century were directly inspired by those in the Vendée. The Bolsheviks, he said, modeled themselves on the French revolutionaries, and Lenin himself pointed to the Vendée massacres as the right way to deal with Christian resistance. The common narrative suggests that the Enlightenment, with its secular-minded thinkers, saved us from the obscurantism of the Dark Ages. Yet, as Rodney Stark, the late distinguished professor of the social sciences at Baylor University, so succinctly put it, this idea is pure nonsense. Stark is sick and tired of reading that religion impeded scientific progress and stunted human freedom. In his book, The Victory of Reason, How Christianity Led to Freedom, Capitalism, and Western Success, Stark reveals Christianity, with its inherent belief in a rational God and a coherent world, was the true catalyst for the rise of science and the advancement of human freedom. Stark found that the success of the West, including the rise of science, rested entirely on religious foundations, and the people who brought it about were devout Christians. Capitalism and the scientific revolution that powered it did not emerge in spite of religion, but because of it. If this sounds paradoxical, it shouldn't, Stark argued. Despite the prejudiced arguments of anti-clerical Enlightenment thinkers, free inquiry and faith in human reason were intrinsic to Christian thought. Christianity, alone among the world's religions, conceived of God as a supremely rational being who created a coherent world whose inner workings could be discovered through the application of reason and logic. Consequently, it was only in the West, rather than in Asia or the Middle East, that modern science arose and that alchemy developed into chemistry, and astrology developed into astronomy. In conclusion, the Dark Ages were far from being as dark as we've falsely been led to believe, and the Enlightenment period wasn't nearly as enlightening as is often portrayed. In fact, the Enlightenment ushered in a very dark period of genocide against Christians. The success of the West, including the rise of science, rested on religious foundations, not on secular enlightenment. The Dark Ages, as Professor Anthony Esolen suggests, is much more aptly termed the Brilliant Age, while the Enlightenment period may need to given a far less flattering epithet. So as we delve into history, let's not be blinded by the Dark Ages and Enlightenment labels that secular-minded atheists have attached to these different periods of history. The truth about these periods of history turns out to be far different than what secular-minded atheists would have you believe.